The Warsaw Uprising began on the 1st of August, 1944. 0 hour, or W hour as they called it, was supposed to be at 5 o'clock. But the first outbreak of shooting began earlier in the day at Joliborz, the northern suburb of Warsaw. That encounter, which began at 1:30 p.m., was the first skirmish of the Warsaw Uprising. As the saying goes, much has been written. Was it a good idea? Was it launched at the right time? Were there other opportunities? You may well ask. The fact remains that it did take place, and the people who took part in it were brave and beautiful. In the annals of uprisings against tyrannical rule, the Warsaw Uprising is unsurpassed. For 63 days, the Poles waited for the Russians to come across the river from the east and aid them in their rebellion against the Nazis. This did not happen. History has told us why. The Russians were quite happy to watch the Poles be destroyed by the Germans, rather than for the Poles to be free after World War II. There is no doubt about this. This was Stalin's plan. The Warsaw Uprising is indelible on the memory of the 20th century. At the Warsaw Uprising Museum, this history is set in stark terms. You're able to take a close look at those 63 days of fighting for freedom. This is an experience that will not leave you untouched. It will change the way you think about history of this time. And it will remind you of what a great capital Warsaw actually is. The city that stood against one of the greatest tyrannies the world has ever seen and rose again to become a modern leading city in Europe. The next series of episodes will take you through the history of the Warsaw Uprising. Thanks for watching.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Poland Daily Travel. I'm Will, and with me is Alexandra, who's a guide here at the Uprising Museum in Warsaw. And this is a special week, of course, because this is the week when the Warsaw Uprising began, in the beginning of August 1944. I guess it's a good time to talk about some of that pre-war history of Poland.
It all happened, yes. Still historians discuss whether Warsaw Rising was an apocalyptic end or just a shift in between the occupants. We need to remember that World War II started for the Polish people on September the 1st, 1939. Just 2 weeks later, we were attacked by the Soviet Union, yes? So imagine, at the start of World War II, we had 1 million soldiers, but we were attacked by 1,800,000 Germans and 600,000 Soviets. Mm-hmm. We had military alliances with Great Britain and France, which stipulated that should we be attacked, they would come with their help. But you know that this very first period of World War II is known as phony war. They declared war on Hitler, but did nothing. Yes? So we struggled alone. And eventually Warsaw was invaded by those two neighbors. Yes, it was all made possible because before the start of World War II, our neighbors, Soviets and Germans, signed a secret agreement known as Ribbentrop-Molotov Agreement, Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, in which they divided spheres of influences in Central and Eastern Europe.
These being the two foreign ministers of the countries.
Yeah, that's
Soviet
it.
Union and Germany.
That's it. And times of World War II for us were unbearable, yes, because we lost 6 million inhabitants. It constituted 17% of our population. Every fifth Pole was dead. Yeah. So we need to understand that every single Polish family has stories related to World War II. It's just impossible to forget about those terrible times because we don't have graves of our relatives because they were either taken to Siberia by Soviets or died in concentration and death camps.
Which were
German Nazi concentration camps.
Correct, and placed all about Poland in different locations. We know the names: Auschwitz and Majdanek and Sobibor and Belzec and so forth. There was 10 or more of these camps, large ones. And the inhabitants of Warsaw, I mean, Warsaw was treated as a kind of province of the Germans, wasn't it?
As a colony.
Yeah, a colony, and an administrative colony of their Eastern Reich, in a sense, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So they needed to really subjugate the populace. If they could not either put them into certain labor channels for them, or just get rid of them. And they didn't hesitate to murder people on the spot. And if you go around, I mean, it wasn't just about camps or the Jewish ghetto. It was also about wholesale massacre. Palmyra on the outskirts, and Campinos.
Deportations, forced labor. So there's no end to the list, in fact. And in fact, we're about to hear the sounds of bombardments, because they are here for us to transfer us to those times of terror. For us, this is kind of attraction, but for people who went through it all, it's too much. They need to draw back.
Yeah, I think it's also, it might also be worth saying that to attribute to Poles collaboration with Germans, and to any extent, appreciable extent, is ridiculous, because of the wholesale massacre of Poles. Poles were Jewish and Catholic. They weren't. There was no separation. They were all Poles, and it's important to say that any death was the death of a Pole, whether it was Jewish or Catholic, right? And that's a point that needs to be emphasized. And you know what? For a start, try to imagine yourself perhaps in that position and how you would feel, because this is a story of an uprising against slavery. It's like a Spartacus. We know the movies, from the movies and the book. We know about that story of rising against the Romans. It's rather like that in this case, isn't it?
It's struggling against evil.
And evil. There is good and there is evil.
Yeah.
There is.
As it always been.
Of course. Yeah, okay. Well, here we are. That got me going. That was very interesting. Okay, let's take a short break. We're going to move on. We've got a lot to show you. And you can already see Alexandra's a fascinating lady. So we're going to move on to the next place. And boy, it's really, really crowded, and that's a good thing. A lot of people coming here, for a lot of tourists coming here, not just because they're traveling through, but because they want to know history. And these are people from all over the world, as well as Poland and Central Europe. Okay, stick with us. I'm Will. This is Ola. We'll be right back.